Hey, what's up? My name is Norris, and welcome back to another Sew Along. Today, I will be filling in for my wife, Mimi G Style. She's extremely busy at the moment, finishing up her book, so I'm helping out, and I will be doing the Sew Along for Simplicity Pattern 9381. Now, this is a double-breasted suit jacket. She's already done the pants sew along, and only thing else you need is the jacket, and I will be showing you every single detail of the construction of this jacket. So if you're new to sewing or just need a refresher course, you can click the Sewing Basics video in the description box below. Because this is not a learn to sew video, you do need some type of knowledge of sewing. So if you brand new and you want to learn how to sew, you can visit us at sewedacademy.com and you can get the first 5 courses free once you sign up for the free trial. All right, let's get started. Okay, once again, like I said, we will be working on Simplicity Pattern 9381. And we will be doing the jacket, which is a double-breasted suit jacket, and it is view A. Now, if you flip to the back, you have all your body measurements on the flap here. So don't forget, there's information actually on the flap. So don't try to, if it's gonna rip off, make sure you put it inside your envelope. And those are all the measurements you will need to figure out what your sizing will be for the jacket. And if you look for A, you'll see the jacket, you'll know how much fabric you need. And then once you come down here to the finished garment measurements, that'll give you an indication of what that finished garment will be when it comes to your measurements. So when it comes to fabric, you have a lot of different options. As you can see right here, you can use that out of a crepe, denim, a faux leather, a lightweight wool, which would be my favorite, a linen, satin. You have so many different options when it comes to it. A lightweight wool is also ideal, which would be really great. So once you figure out what type of fabric you want to work with, we can go through all the pattern pieces. Okay, the first pattern pieces you will need, pattern piece number 6, which is the flap. You want to cut 4 out of fabric and 2 out of interfacing. And then you will also need pattern piece number 7. Now this is the welt. You will be cutting 4 of these out of fabric and 4 out of interfacing. Pattern piece number 8 is your pocket bag for pocket A, which is the lower pocket on your jacket. And all of this combination it works together. So you want to cut 4 of these. I would prefer 2 out of lining and then 2 out of fabric. But if your fabric is not that heavy, you can do all 4 of them out of this. And then next you will need pattern piece number 3 is the upper pocket lining. You need to cut 1 of these out of lining. And then pattern piece number 4 is your upper pocket. You will cut 1 of these out of fabric. And then pattern piece number 2, this is your upper welt that goes on your upper welt pocket. And this right here all works into a combination with each other. And it only goes on your left. So as always, I don't want you to be goofy and have a pocket on your right side of your suit jacket. It always goes on your left, and these here all go together. Next, we have pattern piece number 12. It's the upper collar. You will cut 2 of these out of your fabric and then 2 out of interfacing. Pattern piece number 11, you want to cut 1 of these on a fold of your fabric and 1 a fold of interfacing. Okay, next I have pattern piece number 1. It's the front. You want to cut 2 of these out of your fabric and be sure to mark every single marking. You have darts here, you have dots here for your binding box, you have dots here, you have dots here, you have notches. You want to be able to notch and put every single marking that you see, because if you don't translate it well, you're going to have a little bit more difficulty constructing it. Pattern piece number 16 is going to be your back lining. You want to cut 2 of these out of your lining. Pattern piece number 17 is the upper sleeve lining. You want to cut 2 of these out of your lining. Pattern piece number 18 is your undersleeve lining. You want to cut 2 of these out of your lining. Pattern piece number 10 is your front facing. You want to cut 2 of these out of fabric and 2 of these out of interfacing. Pattern piece number 13 is the upper sleeve. You want to cut 2 of these out of your fabric. Pattern piece number 14 is your undersleeve. You want to cut 2 of these out of fabric. Pattern piece number 5 is your side panel. You want to cut 2 of these out of fabric and 2 of these out of lining. Now for your lining piece, you're gonna cut off an inch off the bottom, just only for your lining piece. But for the 2 that you cut out of fabric, you don't cut anything off the hem. You want to keep it just the same. Pattern piece number 9 is the back. You want to cut 2 of these out of your fabric. And then last but not least is your front lining piece. You want to cut 2 of these out of your lining. Okay, so once you have everything cut, interfaced, marked, you see markings here, interface, and you have your lining pieces and all that. Once you have everything ready, we can begin sewing. Okay, now right before we get started, I just want to show you how to create 2 more pattern pieces for interfacing for your sleeve. Now, this is not in the actual instructions, but I do want you to have the option to have it because it will give you a crispier sleeve, because these are working surgeon sleeves. It's a good detail, and having this interfacing will just have your sleeve looking a little bit better. So this is the upper, which is pattern piece number 13. This is pattern piece number 14, which is the undersleeve. Now the hem allowance is 1.5 inches, so you want to measure up 1.5 inches, and then you can just draw a line all the way from your fold line here to the end. And then after that, you want to come just past your buttonholes here, maybe like 1/4 inch away, and then you want to draw a line. Okay, so that line is going to intersect with the end here. So you just want to go all the way until you connect with this line. And then right here, you're just going to measure up another 1.5 inches, and basically you will get this shape. Okay, you want to get that exact shape for your upper sleeve hem interfacing. And I put all the information there so you won't forget in the future what it is. And then for the undersleeve, same thing. You measure up 1.5 inches and you draw a line, and then you measure up another 1.5 inches, and then that's going to be your line where your interface stops. And then over here, you want to make sure that your buttons, when you put your buttons in, it's going to be in the interfacing area. So you end up with a shape just like that. Okay. So these are additional option pieces only for interfacing for your sleeves. If you want to do that, go ahead and do that, and we'll have them ready. And then you can just go ahead and interface these on the back of your fabric. And I will show you that once we get to our sleeves. Okay, so first things first, we're going to work on our front piece. Now this is the wrong side is facing up. You can see the markings here. So only thing we're going to do is do our darts. Now, you want to go ahead and you can start either here or here. I guess I'll start here. And you want to pin where the line is and make sure that pin goes through the other line on the other side. And then we're just going to pin all the way up. Okay, just like that. Now you want to pin the other dart the same way, and once you head over to your sewing machine, remember this is a dart, so you want to backstitch at the beginning, and then you want to sew all the way, and once you get to the end, you're going to sew off your fabric, pull your threads, cut them, and then you're going to tie a couple of knots. We don't backstitch at the end of a dart, okay? Remember that. So do both of those. And also do your other front the same exact way, and we'll continue. Okay, so I'm back from the machine from doing my darts. We have the dart here, but then the dart at the top, I just want you to know you don't go all the way up yet. I just went halfway just so I could start it. But for the most part, we're supposed to wait to do this. So as you can see, we have 3 dots right here. So you want to reinforce the top with stay stitching. So you want to stitch a 1/2 inch away from this dot. Come to the dot, pivot, and then up, and then pivot again, and then a 1/2 inch this way. And then once you do that, you can go ahead and cut to the dot, but not through the stitching. Right there. And then one more time right here. Okay. So this is how the top's supposed to be. If you want to wait to do this dart, you can wait for right now, but I just did it halfway just to start it. So through the process, the line won't get faded, because the more and more we work, if you're using chalk or a pencil marker, it might rub off. So I just did it halfway just so I could still have this up to the top. Okay, so you want to make sure you do not do your dart all the way up on the dart up here to the top front of your front piece. Also at the bottom of your front piece, you have this little cutout shape. So you want to do some stay stitching here, 5/8 of an inch up pivot, and then 5/8 of an inch this way as well, just to secure this corner. And then we're going to take our scissors and we're going to slash until we get to the stitching, but not through it. And then we're going to leave it like this. Okay, so you want to do the other side the same exact way. We went ahead and closed our darts. You want to actually press them. I press the top dart here towards the front, and then this rune right here on the side, I pressed it towards the side. This front right here is the left front, and so that's why you see the binding box for the upper breast pocket. Moving along, as you can see, we have this opening here. So with some of the instructions when it comes to the Welt Pockets, I will be doing them a little differently. It makes it very easy for you. And trust me, you will love Welt Pockets after seeing the way that I do them. So because this right here is open, I'm going to head to the machine and I'm just going to do a zigzag stitch to close this up, maybe about 1 inch. I'm not going to do it all the way, but I am going to do it at least 1 inch. And also, you don't have to zigzag it. You can just take a needle and thread and then just slip stitch it closed, just so we can have it secured when we put in our side panel. Okay, so go ahead and do that. So right here, I went in zigzag just a little bit, so it's closed. And then, as you can see, I have it pinned. Be sure to pin them at all of your notches first. And then the binding box marking that you have on your side panel, it should line up with the binding box on your front piece. Okay, so once everything is aligned, and then you can go to your machine and you can stitch this down using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you do this one, you want to do your other side the same exact way. Okay, moving along, I went ahead and pressed my seam open, as you can see right here. And then now you should have a little slit here in the center. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and take your flap. If you need to, you can pin it a few times. Now you want to head to the machine and you want to stitch start on one side around the bottom and up the other side, stopping here using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, now we're back from the machine. I'm just going to trim this a little bit. Turn it right side out. And head to your pressing table and give this a good press. You want to do your other flap the same exact way. Okay, as you can see, I went ahead and pressed my flap. And if you look on the inside, the interfacing part is going to be facing down and the uninterfaced part is going to be facing up. Now this right here is my welt. I went ahead and folded my welt in half and pressed it really well. And it's a nice crisp welt. Same for the other one. Now if you look at how I have this placed down, now this is my lining. This is the lining for the bottom pocket. So if you look closely, the welts, the folded edge is face down, and then the folded edge on this one is faced up. Now I'm going to take my flap and I'm going to just place it over my welt, just like that, making sure that it's even on both sides. And then I'm going to just pin it a couple times. Okay, just like that. Now if you follow the instructions, this is going to be a little different, but trust me, because of this slit, I'm doing it a little different. If we didn't have the slit, it would be a little easier, but I want to be a little bit more accurate on putting this together, so this is a great option. So now take your lining piece and you want to put it just over your welt like that. And then we're going to pin this a couple times. Okay, now we're going to head over to the machine and we're going to baste. Now, you want to baste using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to put your needle here and your seam allowance is going to be to the right of you. And you're just going to baste all the way down using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you want to do the exact same thing for this. Do both of those, come back and we'll continue. Okay, as you can see, if you look here, you see it based. The welt is based onto the top of my lining, just like this. And if you look here, you'll see that the welt is based to the flap. And I'm going to keep this face upside down like this for a reason. Now I'm going to slide this over and we're going to work with our lining first. So basically, there's a binding box here. If you don't see the lines, you can reinforce them a little bit. Reinforce that line a bit. Okay. So now I'm going to head to the machine and I'm going to stitch this down. Now that we have a basting stitch, that's a guide that we can use to line up and have it exactly where we want it to be. All right, so let's head over to the machine and I'll show you there. Okay, so if you look, this right here is my lining piece right here, pocket bag, and this is the welt that's based onto it. And then you can see my yellow line underneath. So what I do is I want to start at the end, put my needle down, and I'm gonna lift up, and you can see that that basting helps with the guide to guide up on my binding box. So let's go ahead and line it up. You want to backstitch at the beginning and also at the end. And ever so often you want to just double check to make sure it's in place and continue. And we're not going to go all the way to the end. We're only going to stop where the end of that binding box stops. So you want to be careful on where your markings are. Okay, so we're back from the machine. As you can see, my lining and welt is stitched onto the front already. As you can see it's forming a bit. So now you want to take your flap and also your welt that's basted together, and we'll do the same thing. You want to use that basting as a guide to place on top of your binding box. Make sure you have it lined up. You want to make sure you check like we just did, make sure it's lining up, and then you want to stitch that down from one end of your flap to the other end of your flap. So that should be the exact placement of your binding box too, and it should align up with the placement of your lining at the bottom too. Okay, so go ahead and go to the machine, line it up like I said, stitch it down, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, as you can see, I have it pinned, so I'm gonna go ahead and put my needle down right at the end of that welt, well, right at the end of the flap. And then I'm just going to back stitch at the beginning. Pull this pin up, and then you want to see if it's aligned. So just making sure that that basting stitch lines up with our markings, okay? That's always the best way to do it. And just so you know, this is how you know that the welt is going to come out pretty good. If you lift this side up, you can see where your stitching stops. That stitching should stop right where the end of that flap is, okay? So you want to make sure that that's in place and then continue. Backstitch at the end. Okay, now we just left the machine. We have both stitched down. So now we're going to turn this over to the back. And then now we get to see how much more we need to cut. All right, so if you look closely, the main important thing that you want to pay attention to is where the stitching ends. My stitching ends here and my stitching ends here. So now there's no need to go by your binding box marking on your fabrics anymore. If you have markings, just ignore them. If you're off a bit, you only want to go by your stitching. Your stitching is the new thing you need to pay attention to now. Okay? So now that it's already cut a little bit, I'm gonna go ahead and cut only on one layer. I'm only doing one layer right now. I'm going to cut until I get about 5/8 of an inch away from the end, and then I'm going to cut into a triangular motion to the side where my stitching is. Don't cut through the stitching and don't cut past it. You want to cut right where your stitching ends. Okay? So then I'm going to turn it around and we're going to go the other way. So I'm going to cut. And now I'm going to go into the corners again. And I'm cutting to the end of my stitching. Okay. Okay, now that I did that, I'm going to go ahead and tuck this in. Tuck your lining in and make sure that you put the end of the welt in as well too. And then the same thing for your flap. Turn your flap all the way to the inside. Tuck your welt. And before we continue, you will get an idea of how it's going to come out. So now this is basically a perfect welt right before we end up pressing it, okay? So now just head to your pressing table and just give this a really, really good press, okay? Do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so now that we gave it a good press, we're going to go ahead and pull out the flap. Now, the great thing about this design is that you have two options when it comes to your pocket. You can pull the flap out and have more of a casual look and still have that welt up top, or you can tuck it in like we just had it and have a clean look. So it's up to you how you want to rock it once we're done. But don't get too comfortable. We're not in the clear yet because we still can mess this up if we don't pay attention. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this lining is flat underneath. We're going to go to the machine and we're going to do one side at a time. I'm going to flip one side up like this. And that should be a triangle that we cut out. Shape of a triangle. We're going to head to the machine and we're just going to stitch this down right here. And then we're going to move to the other side and making sure that the welt is not overlapping, making sure that the welt are basically touching each other like this. So making sure that is like that, and then you just want to stitch down right there to secure it. Now the reason why I made you pull the flap out is so you won't stitch the flap into that, so it's out the way. And if you want to, you can move it out the way like this if it's really in the way. And then let's stitch this down. Okay, so head to the machine, do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so I'm just working on one side just to give you a better look. So you see the triangle here, then you see your two welts. You want to make sure that they are just touching at the fold and not overlapped or anything. And then once you get that done, you want to make sure you just put your needle down in a good place. And we're just going to go close to the fabric, but not on the fabric, because if you stitch through the fabric, you'll see it on the other end. So we just want to secure and close the end underneath, okay? So backstitch at the beginning and also at the end. Okay, and then once you pull it back, you will see that it is secured on the end right here. Okay, so you want to do the other side the same exact way. Okay, so we're back from the machine. We have both our ends secured. So now we can tuck this or pull it out, and this right here won't go anywhere. So last but not least, we need to finish up the pocket bag. So I'm going to turn this to the wrong side facing up where we see the lining piece. And we're basically going to place this over the top. Now, as you can see, the bottom is just a little bit longer. That's because we constructed it just a little bit different. So it's going to be a little bit longer, but the pocket is going to be the exact same size and nothing is going to be different. So only thing you have to do is just trim the bottom off once we finish sewing. Or you can do it now so you can keep an eye on your seam allowance. So first, let's go ahead and pin this. We're basically going to match it all the way up. Side. Okay, I'm going to move it out of the way just so I can trim this off. Okay, so now we're going to head to the machine and we're basically going to stitch starting from the side. Now this is a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, but if you don't have 5/8 of an inch on the side, don't try to force it. Just do whatever it is there. And then once you start sewing, you can grade back out to a 5/8 of an inch all the way around. And then when you come to the side, if you have 5/8 over here, you can bring it all the way up. If not, just grade back down to whatever you have. Now, I say that because making welts don't always look perfect on the inside because it might be shifted just a bit, but as long as you have enough room and it's centered, you have no problems at all. Okay, so we're fresh on the machine. We went ahead and put our finished putting our pocket together, and it looks like this. And all this is going to be in the lining, so there's no need to serge or zigzag around the end. So if I turn this to the front, you'll see you have a clean finished flap with the welt. And then in the event that you want to not have the welt and have a more slick look, you can just tuck it and it's perfect. What I would say right now, because we still have to finish constructing the jacket, I would just take a needle and thread and slip stitch this right here closed, just a temporary stitch until we finish up the jacket. So next we're going to move along to our breast pocket on the left side. Now if you look here, it looks like it's the right, but it's the left once I wear it, if I turn it the other way. So before we get there, we have to prep it. Now this right here is the lining for the breast pocket. This right here is the welt for the breast pocket. And this is the pocket bag that closes it out on the back. Now we're only going to be focused on these two for right now. Now you want to make sure that everything looks exactly how you see them on the screen. Now you have a slant going upward to the left. This is the front facing up. And then we have more of an arrow pointing this way with the point on this side. That should be on the left side. If you have it like this, it's wrong. And make sure that you have it in the face as well. So once you have it in the right direction and face the right place, we're going to turn it right sides facing. And we're going to stitch on here. And we're going to stitch on the other side using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So do that, come back, and we'll continue. So now I'm back from the machine. I stitched both sides using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then now I'm just going to trim this down to about 1/4 inch. Turn it right side out. Trim some of that corner off. And also on this side. There we go. So it's going to look just like this. So you can go ahead and give this a good press. Once you press it, you want to flip it down. And we're going to take our lining piece and turn it wrong side up. So when it's wrong side up, you'll see it slanting up that way. So now we're just going to place it within our 2 dots. So now we're going to place it within the 2 dots here. I'm going to pin it a couple of times just to keep it in place. Okay, just like that. And just like before, we're going to head to the machine. We're just going to base this down. But this time we're going to be basing it down using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine. As you can see, the welt is based down onto here. And then just like we did the welt pocket on the bottom, you just want to head back to the machine, line up your basing stitches with the binding box, and you're going to stitch that down. Okay, so do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so now we're back from the machine. As you can see, I went ahead and stitched this down. The welt is up under here, and you can see it's forming. Okay, so I'm just going to turn this to the back. And before we continue with the welt, I just want to note that there's a notch on this seam right here on the right side. You want to go ahead and slash into that, but don't cut through your thread in a diagonal way. And then we're going to take the top portion and we're just going to press it to the side panel, just like this. Now this is for the instructions. I'm sure it's some type of fit or some type of technical construction detail that's going to help once it's completed. So go ahead and make sure you do that there. Okay, so next, if you look right here, you have your stitching. I'm going to flip this back around, and I'm just going to cut that in the center of the binding box. Okay, and cut that in the center. Once I do that, I'm going to cut down. And then once I get about 5/8 of an inch away, I'm going to cut to where my stitching is, not to where any of my binding box might be, but to my stitching. So you want to cut diagonal, and then at the top you want to cut diagonal to the corner of that binding box right there, and then you'll leave yourself with a triangle, as you can see right here. Okay, so I'm going to turn this around. Do the same exact thing this way. Once I get 5/8 of an inch away, maybe 1/2 inch away, I'm going to turn this side up and I'm going to slash to where my stitching finishes. Okay, and then to the corner of the binding box at the top. And that'll leave you with a triangle, just like that. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and tuck this in. It looks really clean so far. We're halfway there, guys. Just hold on, hold your breath. So flip around. We're going to head to the pressing table, and you want to press this down. You want to press that triangle out. And then you want to flip up the top to where you see that line, to where you see that binding box line. It should be 1/4 inch. Flip that up, and you want to give that a good press too. So press all of that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, now that we gave this a good press, you can see that the 1/4 inch is pressed up top. You see the triangles to the side pressed out, and then the lining is pressed down. So now we're going to take our other piece of the pocket bag, and you'll see that the angle is going diagonally up. So that's how you know it's the right side. So you just want to place this right over top. And then if you look up here, you can grab the top of that, and then you want to pin. You want to flush this to the top of where you press up the 1/4 inch. Pin it. Okay. So now if you turn this up like this, give you a sky view what this should look like. So we're just going to head to the machine and we're just going to stitch across the top using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you should see the dots on your pocket bag piece. That'll indicate to where the stitching would start and then where it should end. Okay, and make sure it's flush to the top and everything is even. Do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, the 1/4 inch, as you can see, we're just gonna back stitch at the beginning and also at the end. Okay, so we're back from the machine. As you can see, you see the pocket bag attached at the top, but not on the sides, as you can see. So go ahead and give it a good press, and then now we're just gonna close out the side where the triangle is. So we just want to pull that back, stitch this right here down, and then do the other side the same exact way. Once you do that, you're going to stitch all the way around, only on the pocket bag, and then up the other side using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do all of that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, once you close it out, you'll see that the bag is complete. It's secured up top and around the side. Go ahead and turn it to the front now. And if I peel this back, this is the only thing that's not secured. So what you want to do is you want to take needle and thread and you just want to secure this close. Now it is optional. You can go to the machine and you can add stitch on both sides. So in my opinion, I would prefer to just slip stitch it closed on both sides. Just right here and then right there, so it could be clean with no top stitching. Okay, so now since we completed all of our welt pockets, we can continue with the rest of the construction of the jacket. Okay, next you want to grab your 2 back pieces and you want to do some stitching along the neckline. So once you do that, we can go ahead and take them and turn them right sides facing. And then now you just want to take your pins and you want to pin it along the center back. Okay, now that we have it pinned, we're going to start from the hem and stitch all the way up to the neckline using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, now that we have our back pieces stitched together at the center back, seams pressed open, we're gonna go ahead and apply, attach the front to the back at the shoulders and also at the side seam. So you wanna go ahead and match up the shoulders, go ahead and pin it a few times. And then for the side, pin where your notches are first. Okay. Now that we have it pinned at our shoulders and our side seam, you want to pin the other side the same exact way. And then we're going to head to the machine. You're going to stitch across the shoulder using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And the same thing on the side seam. You want to just stitch all the way down using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do both sides for your shoulders and your side seams. Come back and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine. As you can see, the shoulders are done, and then also both of our back side panels right here. So now we're gonna move along and we're gonna work on our undercollar. So we're right sides facing. You just want to align your pieces, pin them, and then now just head to the machine and we're going to stitch across using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And once again, we just take both pieces right sides facing and then stitch them along here. Do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the pressing table, open up the seam, gave it a good press. And then now right sides up, you want to have your double notches down, and then the markings right here is gonna be up. So I'm gonna put this to the side for right now, just so you can make sure that everything is aligned and set up the exact same way I'm doing it. Now, early on, I told you that we did not bring our dark all the way up. If you did do your dart, make sure you don't do it up. If you did do it all the way up, you want to take it out right here. And if you didn't do the dart yet, you're exactly where we need to be. So you want to go ahead and grab your undercollar. We're right sides facing. And like I said, your dots up here should be to your neckline, and your double notches should be to the bottom. So you want to take your dots, which is right here, and we're going to align them on one side. Now, mind you, we slit into the corners here, just so you know what it looks like. And then you're going to go ahead and match that up just like that. Okay? So when we pin, you want to pin where your dart is and make sure you're in the place where that dot is on the other side. Okay? So you want to make sure we're there. And then on this side, you want to make sure you pin right there where that dot is underneath. Okay? And then that's how it's going to look. And then the same thing on this side. So you want to align that dot. When you put your pin in, you want to look underneath as in a good place. And then the same thing here. Okay? So now we're going to head over to the machine, and we're just going to stitch from dot to dot using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then over here, doing the same thing. Stitch from dot to dot using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine, and as you can see, I went ahead and attached the undercollar to the jacket, and then I opened up that seam and I pressed it, and it looks really nice and neat, just like that. Okay, so now we're going to actually form that dart. So if you haven't already formed a dart, you want to go ahead and pin it at the very bottom. Since I stopped almost midway, I'm going to catch it back up and then basically align up that dart here. And I'm going to pin, making sure that it goes through both lines on both sides. And that's where you go ahead and you want to start attaching the collar to the jacket. Now, this is the dart, and then this is where we slashed right here, and then this is where the collar and the jacket starts. Okay, so you want to pin right there. And that marking that you should have had right there should be right there on that seam, right there on that shoulder seam. And then the center back should match the center back of that undercollar. And then now I'm going to jump over here to the other dart. So we just want to form that dart. And then where that dart stops, the collar and the jacket starts. And then we're going to continue pinning it the same way. So just for clarification, that dart is going to run into your back and your undercollar. And then you just go all the way through, and that's what's going to attach it to the jacket. So do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine, and the undercollar is precisely placed onto the jacket. As you can see, you should have a little slit here in the corners, but all of this right here should be placed onto the jacket. So I'm going to turn it around just so you can see. I also went ahead and pressed open that seam right there. Okay, now we're starting with the sleeve. So now this is the upper sleeve, and this is the lower sleeve. And as you can see, I went ahead and added my fusible interfacing to the inside, to the wrong side of the pattern pieces, okay? And it basically looked just like this. Once we fold up, we press. Once this get finished, you have a nice crisp sleeve. So that's why I had you create that. If you notice right here, there are 2 notches on this side of the upper sleeve. You're supposed to gather in the sleeve just a little bit. So just do 2 rows of basting stitches and then just gather that in a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to attach the upper sleeve and the lower sleeve together right here on this seam here. So we're just basically going to do this. So the right side is facing. We're going to pin at the notch first. Okay, so then we're going to head to the machine. We're going to stitch starting here all the way down to the sleeve hem using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine. As you can see, I went ahead and pressed that seam open, and it's nice and flat. You have a nice seam here. So next, there are 2 corners on both sides, one on the upper sleeve and one on the lower sleeve. You want to reinforce that corner by doing a basting stitch at that big dot, pivoting and then going up. And you don't have to do no more than a 1/2 inch on both sides of that dot, but you definitely want to do it on both sides. A 1/2 inch to the dot, pivot, and then go up. And that should be 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on both pivots. And then once you do that, you want to go ahead and take your scissors or rotary cutters, and you want to make a slit to that stitching without going through the actual stitching. So like that. Then I'm going to do this one. Okay. So once you make the slit, we're going to move along to this part. So working on the upper sleeve hem down here at the bottom, there should be 2 dots, 1 dot here and 1 dot there, which is a 1/4 inch away from those edges. You want to turn that right side facing, and we're going to pin through both of those dots. So you want to make sure the dots are lined up. Okay. So now that we have that pin, we're going to head to the machine. We're going to stitch starting at the bottom, and we're going to stitch up until we get to the dot, and we're going to stop. And we're going to do that using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, moving along, as you can see, I went ahead and stitched that together. So right now, I'm going to turn this like this, so we can see the wrong side of the hem facing us. So on this side, I'm going to turn up that seam allowance, and I'm going to pin. Okay. So on this side, I'm going to measure up 1 inch. Measure 1 inch, and I'm going to put a marking. So that marking indicates where I'm going to stop stitching. So on this side, I'm going to sew up a 1/4 inch away from the edge, and I'm going to back stitch and cut my threads and stop right there, an inch up from the hem. Okay, so do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine, and now we're going to turn this right side out. But basically, I just want to just trim a little bit so that corner will be nice when I turn it around. And then maybe a little bit here. Just that corner tip. And then I'm just going to turn this right side out, point out that corner. Okay. Now you want to head to your pressing table, and we're going to press the bottom of the hem nicely in place, and we're going to continue. Okay, now that I press the hem, we're going to turn this right side facing onto itself, and we're going to pin at the very bottom where your 2 dots should line up. See here And then here, we're just going to pin right there. Now remember, the upper sleeve has that gather. So if it's gathered too much, let it out. And if it's not gathered enough, you want to just pull it in a little bit more. And then we just want to finish pinning. Okay, so now we head to the machine and we're going to start here and sew all the way down until we get to that dot. You want to move this portion out the way so you can get right there in that corner. And we're going to stitch this down using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, now that we're back from the pressing table, this seam right here is pressed open. And as you can see, you have your working sleeve is forming. So for right now, we're going to put this to the side and we're going to grab our upper and under sleeve lining. So with my sleeve lining, I put a pin to indicate on what side is the right side. So you're looking at the right side. So if you look down here on the hem of the upper sleeve, there's a small dot that we need to reinforce. So basically doing the same thing, stitching 1/2 inch before pivoting and then 1/2 inch after you pivot. And then the same thing here on the undersleeve. But the undersleeve has a large dot. So you just want to start 1/2 inch away, get there, pivot, and then go up. Then once you do that for both, you just want to take your scissors and you want to slash right in the center of that to that small dot if you're on the upper sleeve, and then to the large dot if you're on the undersleeve. Just be sure not to slash into your thread. We're going to go ahead and pin this side here all the way up, the same way we did the regular sleeve. And then basically we're just going to stitch all the way down using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm going to go ahead and pin it one more time. So go ahead and stitch that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, as you can see, we went ahead and pressed this seam open, gave it a good press, and then again on this side of your upper sleeve, there are 2 notches and you want to ease that in. And once you do that, I'm going to turn it right sides facing and we're going to pin it right sides facing. So right here where we slash into our big dot, we're going to connect it to the big dot on this side. Now, mind you, the small dot on the upper sleeve is where we slashed. We're not going to match it up to that. We're going to match it up to the large dot that's right here, close to the edge. So taking the large dot here and bringing it over, matching that up, we're going to pin and making sure that it's going through both markings. And then you're just going to pin all the way up after that. Okay. Now we're going to stitch starting at the top and we're going to come all the way down until we get to the big dot marking, which is right here. And just so you get a better look, so I can show you what it looks like on this side, it looks like this. Now the upper sleeve cutout is right here. And we're matching the big dot on the upper sleeve to the big dot located on the undersleeve. Okay? So once again, you want to stitch starting at the top or even at the bottom, and then just go all the way to the seam using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so I'm back to my pressing table, and I went ahead and pressed my seams open on my lining. And as you can see, this is my undersleeve extension right here. And then this right here is my upper sleeve cutout. So the upper sleeve is gonna have more of a cutout and the undersleeve has more of a extension, okay? So just so you can have a point of reference, I'm working on my left sleeve. So if I was wearing it, or if my wife was wearing it, it would be on her, this right here would be her left. So we're gonna keep the left one, we're gonna keep the actual sleeve right side out, and we're gonna have the lining wrong side out, okay? So now this right here is the upper sleeve on the left side. Now I'm going to fold this back, and you'll see right here where we sewed in that corner. So that's how you know you're in the right place. So now we're going to take the sleeve and lining, and this is wrong side out. So basically the right sides will be touching, and I'm just getting a little closer just so you can see. So this right here is the upper sleeve, and this right here is the hem of the upper sleeve. So I'm going to match up the upper sleeve side extension right here. I'm going to pin, and after I pin, I'm going to show you what it's supposed to look like, because this is pretty difficult. There should be a small dot. That small dot should fall right where that that seam is, right here on that corner. So I'm going to pin one more time right there. Okay. So the very first thing we're going to do, you're going to head to the machine, and we're going to stitch this across using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And we're going to stop right there at that dot. We're not going to go all the way to the end. We're just going to start here and sew all the way to that dot. Do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine, and as you can see, we stitched across using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we stopped at that dot. We didn't go all the way to the end of the lining. So now we're going to take the sleeve hem and just unfold it just a little bit. As you can see, the crease is right here, so the raw edge is there, and we're basically just going to swing this lining across just like this. And first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to match up my seams, and then I'm going to pin. Okay, so after I do that, you want to straighten out the bottom of the hem, and then we're going to pin right there. And then now I'm going to pull it just a little bit. It might start pulling from this side, but that's okay. So on this side, you just straighten it out, and then you want to pin. And then this side right here just extends from the hem, maybe a 1/4 inch, not very much. Okay. So now we're going to head back to the machine, and we're going to start at the bottom of the hem, stitching using a 1/4 inch seam allowance across here, making sure that our seam allowance is matched up on our jacket sleeve and also our sleeve lining. And then we're going to come all the way here, and we're going to stop and back stitch. Okay, so I'm back for the machine, and everything is in the same angle where I left it off. So first we did here 1/4 inch, and then now we just went all the way around the hem right here. And the last thing to do is to close out the under sleeve extension side. So basically, I'm just going to bring this portion up and make it even with that extension right here. And then I'm going to pin. So this right here, you just pull it so it can be flat. And then I'm going to pin again. So last thing I'm going to do here is stitch starting here to here using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, now we're back from the machine. I went ahead and closed out the undersleeve extension right here. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn this inside like this. And then I'm going to tuck that sleeve lining inside the sleeve like this. So I'm just going to tuck all of that inside. And then I'm going to poke my corners back out. So as of right now, you can see how the lining is coming together smoothly. So next, the best thing to do, you have your extensions sticking out and you see that needs to be finished. You want to tuck all of that inside like that, because that's how it's going to look on the outside. And then now we're just going to turn this wrong side out, just like this, okay? So you have your sleeve on one side and you have your lining on one side. So now what you want to do is, we're going to take the sleeve side right here and we'll put a pin in it. And then the lining side should look just like this. Okay? So you have one piece like this, and then you have your other piece I'm going to pull up, and I'm going to pin here. So only thing we're going to do now, we're going to head to the machine, and we're going to stitch starting here and go in a straight line all the way across here. Now this right here is going to be 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, so you want to make sure to have everything lined up. And as you can see, you should have your dot here, you should have your dot here, so we're just going to stitch from dot to dot using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so stitch across, do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, like I said, we're just going to stitch across here using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you want to backstitch at the beginning and also at the end. Now that we're back from the machine, we stitched all the way across. The last thing we're going to do is fold this onto itself just like this. Okay? So one side it looks like this and the other side looks like this. And we're just going to stitch this down one more time through all thicknesses. Once again, it was just like this. You turn it and we stitch this through all thicknesses using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine. And then next we're just going to pull this out. And as you can see, it's finished on the inside, just like that. And all the thing you have to do is give this a good press. And then if you notice up here, I went ahead and did 2 rows of basting stitches, starting with one side, back stitching at the beginning, but not back stitching at the end. I just go from dart to dart, my front dart, and I'll go all the way to my back dart, or vice versa. But whichever one you start at, you want to back stitch, but don't back stitch at the end. And then you just pull your threads until you get that sleeve cap eased in pretty good. That looks like this. So once you do that, you want to ease in your sleeve cap on your lining separately, the same exact way. As you can see, these are not stitched together. And I did that for a reason, because we're going to be hand stitching the lining. And as you can see, the lining of the sleeve cap and also the sleeve is not together. This right here is going to be the very last step where we hand stitch it onto the jacket. So you'll see that later on in the process. Now we're going to move along to our facing. Okay, now we're working on the front facing and also the front lining. So if you notice right here, you do 2 rows of basting stitches so you can gather in between the 2 notches, and then also the same thing for your lining piece. And then the same way we did the front piece, and turn it to the back. If you see right here, there's 2 dots right here. So you want to reinforce those dots, reinforce these corners. So just stitch about a 1/2 inch from the marking, pivot, go across, and then pivot again about another 1/2 inch up. And then once you do that, we're going to slash right into those corners without cutting into our threads. So just like that. And then the same thing here. Okay, and also right here at the bottom, you want to make sure that you have that dot right there, because that's where we're going to be stopping sewing. So we're right sides facing. I'm going to go ahead and pin at the bottom right where that dot is. That's why it's so important for you to make sure you put all your markings, pin at your notch. So now that we have the pin, I just want to remind you that you do have a dart right here on your front lining piece. So you do want to do that dart before you pin and sew this together. And once again, we're going to be starting at the dot, back stitching, sew all the way up to the top, okay? Or if you start at the top, you want to stitch all the way down and you want to stop at your dot. You don't want to go all the way to the bottom hem, okay? So you want to sew that down using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, now that we're back, before I press anything, I want to come down here and just remind you that it's not stitched all the way down to the bottom. We started our marking. So what you want to do is you want to measure up 1 inch and put a marking, and then we're going to slash right there. So I'm going to slash right there without going through my stitching. And then now we're going to press this exactly like this. The seam allowance up here is going to be pressed towards the front lining piece, and then the bottom is going to be pressed towards the facing. So give it a good press and we'll continue. And be sure to do your other facing and your other front lining the same exact way. Okay, so next we're going to attach the side panel. So with right sides facing, I'm gonna go ahead and start pinning. You have a notch right here. Also, I want to point out that you do have to take off an inch from the hem on your side lining pattern piece, okay? So once you do that, it should fit, and you just want to stitch all the way across using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And while you're at the machine, you want to go ahead and grab your back lining pieces. Now you just want to put them onto each other, right sides facing. You want to stitch all the way down to the hem using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And up here you have a stitching line to create your pleat. So you just stitch, and then when you get to the end of that stitching line, you just back stitch and break your threads. And then once you do that, you're just going to head over to your pressing table, and you're going to press all of your seam allowance to the right. Okay, so go ahead and stitch your back lining pieces together, and then also your side panel piece to the rest of your lining. Okay, so before we continue, I want you to find that notch on the seam allowance attached to your front lining piece, not both of them. So we're just going to go to that notch, and we're going to slash through it until we get to our stitching without going through our stitching. And then we're just basically going to open the rest of that up, and then the seam allowance that's above that slash, we're going to press it towards that side panel. Okay, so press that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so next I have my back lining piece faced up, and then I'm going to take the rest of my lining and facing, and we're going to pin at the shoulders. Then once we pin at the shoulders, we're going to pin at that side back seam. You have 2 notches that matches up. Okay. So you want to pin the other front facing and lining to the other side seam and shoulder the same way. And then we're just going to take both sides to the sewing machine. We're going to stitch across the shoulder using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then across the side back panel here using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And once again, you're going to pin and sew the other side the same exact way. Okay, so now that we have the facing and all of our lining pieces attached, the shoulders, the side seams, the side panels right here, we're going to attach the upper collar to this facing and lining. So we're right sides facing and making sure that you have all your markings on your upper collar. There are two notches located right here, one on the left, one on the right. They should line up with the notches that are on your back lining piece. And you want to pin there first. And with your marking right here, you want to make sure that matches up with your shoulder seam. And then when we get here, you want to make sure that this lines up with that dot, the same place where you reinforced. And then you want to just, as you see here, you want to turn that in a little bit so you can line that up with your marking here. And then the same thing on the other side. Okay, so we're going to head to the machine. We're going to start here. We're going to sew one dot, pivot, go all the way across the neck, and then pivot again, and then sew, stopping at this dot right here. I do want to note that it might be a little easier to turn it this way so we can actually see, like right here, so we know to sew here and then pivot, and then also here on the other side. So that's just a good tip if you actually want to see exactly where it's going so you won't mess up that collar. All right, so do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so moving along, as you can see, we went ahead and attached the upper collar. Be sure to clip into your seam allowance just so you can lay flat, and also clip into your curves. As you can see right here, if you don't clip here, you're going to get a little bunching up on your fabric. So be sure to clip right there on both sides. So now we're going to take the jacket and we're going to pin only on the collars. Okay, so your upper collar and your under collar, you're just going to pin it together, right sides facing. You want to match your double notches here, and also your double notches here. Okay, so now we're going to head over to the machine. I'm going to put one right here. And we're going to start. So basically we're going to take this portion and move it out the way. And we're going to start here. We're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch. Come up here to the corner, pivot, go all the way across the top, still at 5/8 of an inch, and then pivot one last time. And then, like I said, we're going to take this portion, move it out the way, and we're going to just finish up back stitching and cut our threads right here. Okay, so do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine, and what we're going to do now, we're just going to clip the corners real quick. A little bit here. Trim just a little bit off. I don't want to take too much. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to turn the collar down. Okay, all the way across. Turning it down. And while we're here, I'm going to go ahead and point my corner out. Make sure it's nice and neat. So notice kind of crazy what I did. So I pushed the collar down, and I'm taking the seam allowance here, and I'm taking the seam allowance here. And I'm just putting them together, and I'm going to pin because we're going to stitch this together. Okay, so now that we have the pin, we're going to start on this side right here, and we're going to stitch all the way across using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So basically just following that same stitching line. If you don't trust yourself to not stitch outside of that, you can stitch inside the seam allowance 1/8 of an inch inside, okay? So do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, so now that we stitched all the way across, we're gonna start pinning along our center front. Okay, so we're just going to take this part of our lapel here, and we're going to pin. There should be a double notch. And then down here to the bottom. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to start right here. We're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, pivot, go down all the way to front. We're going to pivot right here, and then we're going to finish up right there at this last dot. Pivot one more time, and then we're going to stop right here. Basically where we stop stitching right here on this seam, where the lining and the facing is, we're going to stop right there in the middle of that seam. Okay, so you want to pin and sew your other side the same exact way. Okay, so now that we stitch here and then down the side, all the way down here, and then pivoting right here. Next step is to understitch. So basically they want you to understitch this portion where the seam allowance is laying down on your front piece. And then you're just basically understitching on this side where your seam allowance is here, touching your front piece. Okay? But when you get here where that design slants right here at the bottom, you're going to understitch on your facing side. So you're going to come here, and then you're going to come on this side, and then you're going to understitch close to the edge, just as far as you can get. You don't have to go all the way down to the end. And then the same thing for the top. You're not going to be able to make it all the way to this peak. So basically, if you get here, you can just stitch until you get to about right here. Anyway, moving along, once you do your understitching, we're going to do quite a bit of trimming. We're just going to trim, our corners. So let's trim a little bit for now, and then once you turn it right side out, if you need more trimming, definitely go back in there and just take a little bit more off. Okay, so before we close out the bottom, you just want to just check to see how your lapels are coming out. To see if you need to trim anymore. So I'm just going to poke this out myself just to give it a good test. Okay. That's going to look pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and close out the bottom. And if you do close out the bottom, you're still able to get into it through the sleeves. Now, if you're following the instructions that's that came with the pattern, it's being constructed just a little bit different because it has the sleeves already closed out, so they leaving room for the bottom. But I find this way much easier. Okay, so when you get to one of the corners, you're gonna fold back that seam allowance that's on your fabric, and then we're going to slide the lining up to the end. And I'm going to try that one. Now I'm going to show that one more time. So we take that seam allowance, we fold that back, and then we bring the lining, because the lining is much shorter. So we just bring it up, and then we're just going to pin it right there. And then moving along, you want to pin at your seams, matching your seams, matching your back seam. And then same thing on this side, we're going to fold that back. We're going to bring the lining up to it. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to stitch all the way across, starting here, going all the way across the bottom of the hem, and then stopping here at the other side, okay? And we're going to do that using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, now that we closed out the hem across the bottom, we're going to turn this right side out through one of your sleeves. Okay, so you want to go take this jacket to your pressing table and give it a really, really good press. Okay, so after you give it a really good press, you see the jacket come more to life. Now, at this step right here, it's sort of kind of optional depending on what kind of fabric you're working with. We will be adding shoulder pads to this, but because my wife needs to fit this and all that stuff, I'm not going to do all of that right now. I'm just going to finish it up, then we'll open it back up and she can add whatever shoulder pads she wants to after she fits it. So just so you know, you can add the shoulder pads by tacking the top of the shoulder pad here on the seam allowance. So when you tuck it in, it'll stay in place right here. And then you also can add some fleece rib knit, which is 2 inches by 6 inches. And you can just add that along the seam allowance. So you just base that here before we add the sleeves. After you add your shoulder pads, if you need to, you want to go ahead and base this. Okay, so you can go ahead and base this all the way around, or you can just pin it and then grab one of your sleeves and we can repin it and then sew it all together with one stitch. Okay, so I'm grabbing one of my sleeves because I'm going to stitch it all together instead of basting it. But what I do want to do, I want to take my lining and then tuck it out the way because we're only going to be doing just a sleeve. So I'm going to find my underarm marking. And then from the inside, I'm going to look for it and align it together. Okay, so once I match that up and I match up my notches, I'm going to go ahead and repin all of this together. Got my double notch. And as a reminder, your sleeve cap supposed to be eased in, so it shouldn't be a problem trying to put it into the jacket. Okay. And mind you, the lining is still out the way. Okay, so now we're going to head to the machine and we're going to stitch all the way around using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You want to pin and sew your other one the same exact way. Okay, so once we have the sleeves attached, I'm going to show you what we're going to do for the lining. So for the lining, obviously you're going to do your sleeve cap and all that. So what we're going to do is just take the seam allowance, 5/8 of an inch, and press it down. So once you have it folded down, you just want to place it over that seam allowance that's shown for your armhole. You just want to put it there, and then usually I just take a couple of pins and I just pin it in place first. So I just keep going. I turn under that seam allowance, and I just pin it. So once you make your way all the way around and you have it in place, you're just going to take a needle and thread, and we're going to hand stitch it closed. Okay, so you just hand stitch it closed all the way out, and you have a finished armhole on your lining for your sleeve and also for your front lining. Okay, so once you do all that, you want to go ahead and do your buttonholes, add your buttons. Don't forget your working buttonholes and your buttons on your surgeon sleeves. And then you can take out your stitching here so you can use your flap for your welt pocket. And then just give it a really good press and you're all done. All right, congratulations. You finished your double-breasted suit jacket. I'm so excited to see all your makes. Now be sure to tag Mimi G Style on all your makes and also tag me at Norris Dancer Ford. All right, see you in the next video.